Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of PixlFeed Radio. I think it's on 73. I just pulled it up. And I'm here with my friend BILL Flynn. Bill is a very interesting individual. I think I've never met anybody who has actually pitched Steve Jobs and it's been tracked down by Alan Mulally, the CEO of Ford and Boeing, many times. You have succeeded more than most, and you have also failed a few times in your life, and I'm assuming you learned from those failures. And you work as an advisor for CEOs, CMOs, and you know how to grow companies and make them successful. So welcome to the show. How you doing, Bill?
Hey, thanks for having me on, Christian. I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to chatting with you for the next whatever amount of time.
Yeah, I'm sure the first one everybody's waiting for is like, what happened with Steve Jobs? We'll get to that, and I'm sure we'll get to it at some point. But before we get into it, Bill, tell us about your background, how you get started. What were you like? I want to say like a leader, entrepreneur at heart since you were a kid. Were you starting things since you were a kid and just it progressed from there? How did it all start?
No, I'm not one of those lemonade stand. Sold investment stocks when I was 11 and made lots of money. I was a regular kid. I went out and played and did sports and tried to not fail at school. But about 30 years ago, give or take, I got a chance to do some things just due to family relationships, which got me into high tech. And soon thereafter, began doing startups. So for about 25 years, I did startups for a living. And living is in quotes because it's an interesting sort of career to take.
Absolutely.
And I did 10 of them over that time. Had a pretty good track record. I'm either 5 for 10 or 5 for 7, depending on how you count my contribution. Some of them I left before really anything happened, or I was told to leave in some cases. So I never left any of the ones that succeeded. So how's that? That's
right.
I'm not until they already had, and I sort of went on to the next one. So that was my first sort of arc, right? I did those for a number of years. And since I'm in the Boston area, they're all software startups, SaaS and whatever. The second arc is a coaching arc. And I basically took some experience that I had as a leader and said, how can I make this so I can do this again, be this sort of coaching thing again? And I reached out to a whole bunch of organizations. I think I reached out to 4 or 5, and I reviewed about 10 of them and found one that really sort of aligned more closely with me and what made sense to me. And I joined them, learned their process, etc., about 5 years ago. And then since then, I've been coaching leadership teams more so than like an executive. There are executive coaches that are out there, and they work within an individual, be it a leader of a team or the leader of the company. I don't do that on purpose. It sort of happens as part of what I do. But, I work with teams. I teach them a framework. I help them to figure out how to take the guesswork out of growth, which is sort of the subtitle of my book. And I've taken a lot of stuff that I've experienced, but also I've been researching business for over 30 years and really intensely in the last 5 or so. And I've really seen some of the same patterns that successful leaders do that not only build a good company for the short term, but really for generations and centuries in some cases. I've seen some businesses that are still around and started 1,000 years ago, which is crazy. So that's sort of the 2 arcs of my career.
No, that's very interesting. It's funny that you there's a few things you brought up that are very interesting to me. And one of them, I always hear this one, those who teach is because they can't do it. And I go, that's not true. Like some of us just like to share our knowledge. You know what I mean? Like I share it through my YouTube channel. I share it to this podcast. It's just, because it was people kept asking me, it's like, how do you do it? How do you do it? How do you do it? I'm like, well, people are asking, might as well just put it out there. Why not? If I can do that. And, the truth of the matter is that there's people out there willing to pay for that information from you just to get there faster and avoid all the pitfalls that we went through. And why not be able to help with that? It's a lot of the big guys do that. So that's one thing that bothers me. And the second thing that you brought up was the focus thing, that every, successful leader or, they all have, I didn't even think you said focus, but they have one thing in common. And the one thing in common that I've learned from just reading books and, watching like reading biographies and stuff like that is absolute focus. Like these people are obsessed. And the reason why they become successful and they're able to do what they do and grow these companies or be successful, whether you're a sports, celebrity or whatever, it's because the amount of focus that goes into their career or their craft, it becomes an obsession. Sorry, Alexa, why not? Oh, somebody's at the door, I guess. Oops, sorry about that. What was that? So, like, for example, if you look back, some of these guys, I just got done reading the biography for Rockefeller. It's called Titan.
Titan, yeah, sure.
It's such a long book, but
it is a very big book.
Yeah, but if you read it, he did back then what Uber is now in the oil business. While everybody was drilling for oil, he's like, I'll just build a refinery and I'll just refine the oil. He was the middleman, and he became essentially a billionaire, for that time. So it's the people who reach that level, they're just wired a certain way. And I'm sure you met some of the big Silicon Valley people and all that, and some of these CEOs. So I'm sure you noticed some of these things in them, correct?
So if you want to get to the top of any business or sport or whatever it is, it takes a skill, then yes, you have to put in the hours, right? You have to put in the reps. And it doesn't matter whether you're playing the violin or running a company or learning how to play baseball, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. Those folks that do that put in the time, and they do what's called deliberate practice, right? They actually figure out how to make sure they improve. They don't just do things over and over again. They're always trying to find the ways to make them a little bit better. So that's definitely true. And Rockefeller did that as well. If he kept moving up the value chain, right? He had the refineries, but then he also built the barrels, right? And then he owned the railroads, the tracks, and so he just sort of kept sort of staying ahead of where everyone else was, so he could make his money. And I don't know if it's true anymore with Bezos, et cetera. But if you add up all the Standard Oil companies that are now out there, like Exxon and Mobil and whatever, Rockefeller would still be the richest man in the world.
It's insane. It's insanity. Like I was reading the whole thing. I'm just like, this is crazy, man. And he was apparently he was such a humble guy. He was just like very religious and didn't spend money. He was cheap, which is like that. I found that very, very funny. Like he kept everything down to a cent,
Well, he's basically an accountant, if I recall. He was an accountant.
Yeah, he had a ledger that he kept track of every cent daily, and that he knew every time where his money was at. And the thing that I found interesting is how he raised his kids too. It was pretty much the same way. Right. So, so obviously focus. So now you're in the Boston area. What year is this that you started working with all these like SaaS startups? What years are we talking about?
1991 was probably the first startup. It was a quasi startup. And then in 95 was my first internet startup.
Okay. So you were right there at the beginning. Right at the beginning.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm pretty old.
No, man. No. Hey, listen, I'm not young spring checking myself. Like I remember getting, AOL in the mail and being excited about it. Like the AOL disc, because I could get online. So what was the first startup back in 93, and how did it progress from there?
So 91 was a company called Dragon Systems, which was a speech recognition company.
I know that one.
And it was the first version of Siri. The people who were there actually created the first version of Siri. It's now, I think, a different technology than what was brought. In 95, I was with the first internet e-commerce company in the world, and it was called Open Market. And we were called the Netscape of the East. We were one of those crazy companies that I think we had 5 million in revenue, and we went public. We weren't in any way profitable. We were worth, I think, upwards of $3 billion at some point in time. It was crazy, just crazy stuff. So that was my first one, and then I did a whole bunch after that from there. Yeah. And
then, so when you started growing this company, so what made you? Obviously, you're working with the successful startups. What made you, pivot from working with these startups and once you exited those to move into the leadership role and the coaching role side of things?
Yeah, there were sort of two things that caused that to happen. One was I'm not a founder. I've always the guy who scaled it. I worked sales, marketing, GM, sort of a COO kind of role. Mm-hmm. So you have to sort of find the founder. And I had a difficult time the last 4 finding what I call a Goldilocks CEO. You have to be crazy to want to start a company, but you can't be too crazy.
Yeah.
And so I thought I got better and better at interviewing them. And I think part of the reason was that in 2010 or so, give or take and beyond, it was a lot easier to start a company than back in 95. If you started an internet startup in 1995, you needed about $15 million just to start.
I tell people,
all the stuff that we pay little pennies per month now weren't around. You had to buy a data center or buy time in a data center. You had to buy buildings. Now I have a customer of mine now, they don't own an office building. They all work remotely. There are 30 or 40 of them.
We're all remote on my side. Everybody.
Yeah. So a lot of these costs have gone away. So I read a few years ago that the same company to start in 1995 for $15 million would cost about $100,000 to start. So it's a lot easier to start. So I think that's a factor, right? If it's difficult, you're going to really think it through. But if it's easy, maybe you'll just sort of jump in and try it, maybe get some friends and family and whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it, is that I had a hard time really trying to figure out how to make sure that I knew that this founder was someone that I could work with. And then the second was I had a really great experience of coaching between startup 5 and 6. And that was such a rewarding experience. There was lots of stuff. We did really well. I sort of created my own system I cobbled together some things because I wasn't smart enough to know that there were actually some systems out there that I could have used. I made my own and it worked phenomenally well. But the best part was when I left, 2 of the guys that work with me on the leadership team, who were relatively new at managing people and processes, leading, said, I just want you to know the stuff that you made me do was really hard. I hated it, but I loved that you made me do it. I'm so glad because now I know how to do it, right? I taught him how to fish. I didn't give him answers. I said, look, I don't know how to do your job, but my job is to say, where are we going? And as a company and an organization, and your job is to say, where's my group going? And I said, what do you need from me? You tell me what you need from me to get you from where you are, point A now, to wherever we're going. And I will help you do that. And we will all help each other do that. And that was a wonderful feeling. I wanted that feeling again. So I said, how can I do that? And I actually, interestingly enough, the organization that I joined, the book that started it was called Mastering the Rockefeller Habits.
Nice.
It's now called Scaling Up.
Yeah.
So that's where I started. I'm no longer with that organization, but I use the principles because I think they're tremendous principles. So that's sort of what got me to here.
No, and it makes sense. And you know exactly what you're good at, and you identified it, and then you said, hey, this is what I want to do. And I think a lot of people, they feel like they get stuck in a role or a situation, and they feel, well, I guess this is it, and this is what I got to do, and then they get stuck, and that's the difference between, being a leader, figuring out what you need to do. So, being around all these people, what do you think it's, why do you think few companies survive, and then what do you think most of them fail when it comes to the scaling side of things?
Sure.
Because I've heard some horror stories. I read one yesterday with a guy like literally burned through $10 million in months competing against Asana when Asana was released. Yeah. So that's one of them. But from your experience, what do you think most companies fail?
Well, most companies die of indigestion, not of starvation. They do too many things. They don't do them very well, and they spread themselves too thin. And then, as we've seen three economic crises in this century so far, with 9/11 and then 2008 and now COVID. And if you look back in time, if you go back to the 2010s and then the noughts and then the 1990s, there's always an economic crisis of some kind, typically between 6 and 8 years apart. So there's always going to be something that happens. And if you're growing too fast and going too wide, and that happens, and you don't have enough cash in the bank, then you're in trouble. And so a lot of businesses, that will be one of the main reasons that they go out of business or struggle mightily. Maybe they don't completely go out, but they're hobbling, if you will. That's what I found is sort of the most common. But Christian, I about 4 or 5 years ago, because I'm super curious, and I asked that question: is why do businesses go out of business? What are all the reasons why? So I Googled it, and I just started writing down the answers. And I think it was somewhere between 30 and 35. I just stopped writing. There are just so many different ways to go out of business. You hire a bad number two. You have poor fiscal management. You really don't have a strategy. You don't execute well. There are so many different ways to screw up. It's not easy to run a really good business. But what I did find, and I think this is part of your question, is that those that did well, like Alan Mulally, he did really well twice, or you look at people like Bob Chapman or Kip Tindell or John Mackey. Kip Tindell is the Container Store. John Mackey was Whole Foods. Pick your Steve Jobs in Apple version 2, those kinds of things. And Jeff Bezos, he's not necessarily the most popular guy, but from an ability to run a really good business, whether we agree whether it's a good business or not in terms of the world, it's still a very well-run business. They all do the same things really well. And those are 3 things, which is they really understand team. They really understand that they have to create a system to run the business. It's around strategy and execution. They have to get really good at both of those things. And they understand the value of cash as your primary financial growth metric, because cash is the thing that you have to spend in front of growth. And either you make it yourself or you borrow it from someone else. It's better for you to make it yourself because you own your own destiny. If you borrow from someone else, as soon as you allow an investor into your business, you've decided to sell all or part of your company at some point, probably in the next 5 to 8 years, because they want their money back.
Yeah.
And then some. So if you go to a bank or friends and family, you can, they may or may not get their money back, or you certainly have to pay interest at the bank, but they're not going to say you must sell your business or part of your business to pay me back. They'll let you pay over time. So those are the 3 things. Team, because performance is a team sport. Most people are on a team. And according to some research, over 80% of us in at least the US, actually, I think in the world, are on at least one team. Yeah. And some of us are on more than one team. But we don't actually teach leaders how to run really great teams. And that's a skill. Back to that original question, right, about being great at something and focusing. We should be teaching all of our folks, even folks who don't deliberately run a team, aren't ahead of a team, because at some point, some teams just pop up. Something will happen and it's like, oh, we have to solve that problem. And someone sort of says, oh, I'll lead that. And other people help them. That's running a team, whether you have a title of a leader or not, head of a department or whatever it is. And that's about really understanding how to how to attract the right people, how to then craft the right things within the team, understand what the ultimate goal of the success of the team is, how to run a really great meeting involving the team. There are all these things you have to know how to do. And we just assume people know how to do it. And I got to tell you, most of the time we're really bad at it. We suck at meetings. We totally suck at meetings.
Especially in tech. I've witnessed, people get funding or, they started on their own, a couple dudes, coding or whatever. And then they get handed this like insane amount of money. Like, okay, now we're going to hire a bunch of people, and they have no people skill. They have no, it's just, some of us are different than others. And I've seen businesses destroyed because they want to micromanage every single thing, and they're so obsessed with micromanaging everything that they're actually destroying their own baby, instead of like you said, finding someone to start building these teams and running the company, carrying out your vision. So you worry about your vision and let everybody else concentrate on it. But it's about finding the right people to get the job done. Yes. And I guess that's a big a big hurdle to overcome when you don't have that experience. You got to remember, some of these kids, I say kids because I'm 40 now, but some of these kids are like, 20, 19, they don't have experience working for anybody else or anything like that. They never worked for a Fortune 500 company, and all of a sudden now they got to build a team and they have no people skills. So, when I hear people like Mark Cuban, it's like, oh, mentors, nobody needs a mentor. You can figure it out on your own. You could, but I don't think there's anything wrong with mentors. I have a mentor that I have a couple of different ones, actually. I have one for like media buying, and I had another one for just growing my business. And, one of the greatest piece of advice there's 2, but the one that really made a difference right away, it's like, your first hire should be a COO. Like, you need to step back and let somebody else carry the vision that you have in your head and let them deal with like all the stuff. Obviously, I'm still involved, but I would have never guessed in 100 million years that the first hire that I should have done at one point, besides like the usual stuff that project managers and stuff like that, should have been a COO. Like, it never even crossed my mind. In my head, it was like, I'll just do it all. And, if it wasn't for him telling me that, I don't think it would have taken me a long, long time to figure that out. So, I'm pretty sure you agree with me that when you have somebody like yourself coming in and then having an outside point of view and seeing how the company's working, it's a good way to have a second set of eyes and see what you miss because you just don't have the knowledge or you're too in your head. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, you touched on a lot of stuff there, so I'll just do the
Sorry. Sometimes
I'm thinking through like, right, where am I going to go with this? So let's answer that question. Yes, what I do is not rocket science. I'm not this unique unicorn that has this special knowledge that you have to tap into. I have curated a lot of things and I've combined things together, but anyone can do it. I think you made a really good point earlier. I'm more of an accelerant. The name of my company is Catalyst Growth Advisors, and I took months to figure out what do I want to call myself. I want to make sure that made sense, and that's exactly what I am. A catalyst is something that brings two or more things together and accelerates a process.
Right.
And that's what I do as a coach, and any good coach will do that for you, right? So that's, I agree. Steve Jobs had a coach. His name was Bill Campbell. Larry Page.
I didn't know.
Larry Page had a coach. His name was Bill Campbell. Bill Campbell has coached. He's dead now, but he's coached many of the great leaders in Silicon Valley.
I didn't know that.
I read his book. It's called $1 Trillion Coach. Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Google for a while, and then became the chairman. And one of the guys wrote a book called The $1 Trillion Coach, and that's what he meant is that Bill Campbell was responsible for trillions of dollars.
I can't even imagine what being Steve Jobs' coach would have been like. Just like, because I obviously I read his biography and everything you read about the guy. It's just, obviously he was a visionary and he built, when he came back to Apple, he turned into the behemoth that it is today.
Yeah.
But could you imagine trying to coach Steve Jobs? I'm sure those meetings were not fun half of the time.
Well, Bill Campbell was a very strong character.
I can't.
And he didn't take crap from anyone. And I think that's why, I don't know, I can't speak for Steve Jobs, but I think that's why they worked well is that, Bill would say, you're crazy. And here's why, explain why, right? So no, that's not the way to do it. And by the way, you didn't always listen to your coach.
Right.
It's just information that you're getting from them. And what's I didn't know Bill. I actually met Bill Campbell many, many years ago. He was running another company and I happened to be selling to him. I didn't know who he was at the time. And
that's even better because then you weren't nervous.
Yeah. But what I loved about the book and what he really focused on, the first thing he said was the most important thing was team. He said, whenever I talk to a leader, the first thing I asked was, what's going on with the team? Do you have the right people? Do you have the right team to get this thing solved? This person is not a good person for the team. It's affecting, he's all about the team first. Everything was team first, team first, team first. And that was great because I had already sort of come to that conclusion myself. And then I read the book. I'm like, good. This guy who really was a good coach also came to a similar conclusion. So it's always nice to be validated by those who have done it and done it well.
That's good. So obviously you and your company specialize on growing businesses and taking them to the next level. So in order to do that, sometimes you got to pitch people. So, or VC, firms and stuff like that. So I'm sure everybody else is dying. What were you pitching to Steve Jobs and how did that whole thing go down?
Sure. I think I was about 28 or 29. He was at Next. So he had been kicked out of Apple, but he had not come back yet.
All right.
So 93, I don't know what year it was, 93 or 94.
It was, I'm going to tell you right now, I think it was 96 because he came back to Apple in 98 or 99, I believe.
Well, he was out for many, many years.
Right.
And then he went and did Pixar and did some other stuff. So it couldn't have been after 95 because then I had left this company by then. And so this was a speech recognition company. And I was just trying to get computer manufacturers to put speech recognition in their machines. So like Microsoft, even though they're not a computer manufacturer, they licensed our technology. There were some soundboard manufacturers that were doing it. So I was trying to get Acer and Dell and all these, Compaq was a thing then, to somehow put speech recognition in their technology. So I went to Next and I was meeting with some product managers.
Hold on. Sorry. Before we get into how do you even get a meeting with these companies? Like that's another thing that people ask me all the time. It's like, well, I send a cold email and hope for the best or a LinkedIn message, and so you just got to keep pushing or get them on the phone somehow. But
have really cool technology.
That's what I'm saying. But I mean, imagine how many people is trying to get, okay, I want to get in front of Steve Jobs. Yeah. You and like a million other people. Like, how do you even get to the gatekeepers to get to, I mean, it has to be connections or, you know, having something out of this world that gets showcased somewhere. I mean, like, seriously, how do you get, how were you able to get in front of these people? Obviously, you had the technology.
This was a long time ago. This is 20-something years ago.
Right.
The world was a little bit different.
Sure.
For instance, I think his name is Philippe Kahn. Ran a company called Borland Software, which was a pretty big deal in the 90s. It was hundreds of millions, if not over $1 billion company. And email was still kind of new. So I just sent him an email. I figured out his email address because you could just back into, you know, philippe.kahn@borland. And I just sent him a thing. I think if I even remember what I wrote as my subject line, which was Borland poised to pounce. So hokey. Super hokey, right?
Yeah.
But he wrote me back.
That's awesome.
Like a day later, I got a note from Philippe Kahn, and he said, "Yeah, come on in. I'm not going to meet with you, but you're going to meet with my number 2, and we're going to work it." Nothing ever came of it. But I was out. I think if they were in Santa Cruz, I got to drive up Route 17, which is a beautiful drive. I remember I had a convertible Mustang. Is what I got to rent when I was there. It was a beautiful. I loved it. It was a beautiful day. Nothing came of it, but at least I enjoyed the day. So that's sort of, I think that's what I did. These days, it's much harder. People are so much more inundated these days than they were 25 years ago. So I had an advantage over that. And, you know, and I did that myself. In order to really get someone's attention, you have to make sure that you understand their struggles first.
Their pain.
Yeah. And then you say, you know, if you're like these companies that are like you, that don't seem to be in your space, and you're struggling with this, then I'm probably a person that goes a long way. And that goes along with me as well. You know, if they say, oh, you know, you're a coach and most coaches struggle with this, I can help you with that, then I'll at least give them a shot. If someone I get lead gen stuff all the time. Lead gen for coaches. I can get you lots of leads. I said, I don't need lots of leads. So I don't want to talk to you.
Right.
But if they said, oh, this is, you know, if they were more descriptive and they really sort of got inside my head and I said, wow, these people really get what I need, what my struggles are, what progress I'm trying to make, that goes a long way. So that takes work. That takes work from you as a salesperson, takes work from the marketing team, which we don't really do a good job at. We throw a lot of stuff on the wall and hope it sticks, and everyone's doing that. So now most buyers just ignore it as much, you know, unless it's a trusted, credible source, as you said, connections, etc. So I don't have a perfect answer for that.
No. I mean, I'm just curious because, you know, everybody's different. I tell people it's like, pick up the phone. That's the problem that most young people have these days. I don't want to pick up the phone. I'm like, pick up the phone. Just call up. It's like, hey, it's Christian. I want to talk to so-and-so. No. Okay. Hang up. Try it again the next day. Get somebody else. I mean, I think it's much easier nowadays because you can go on LinkedIn, you can go on Google and find out which person works for, you know, which department. And then you start from the bottom and start working your way up. And then it's just one step forward and forward and forward and forward. And trust me, I've done it. You'll get in front of somebody if you really want to. But anyway, so you got the meeting with Steve Jobs, and I can only imagine what this is like. So if you could set the scenario how this goes down, you know, as best as you can, I would love to hear.
Well, I didn't have a meeting with Steve Jobs. So I had there were 2 product managers, I think, that said, why don't you come in? You know, we're building the next cube, or whatever it was called. Right. And we want to see where you're at. And so they sat me down, they brought me into this office. I sort of wound my way through these cubes and things and got into a glass office. And they said, you know, hey, give us a minute. You know, Steve might join us. And, you know, but we'll start in a few minutes. So why don't you set up, because I had to break out my laptop and, you know, set up the microphone and do all those things. And it didn't really register me. I was like, Steve, who? I don't even know who Steve is. I'm thinking, oh, Steve must be like the head of product management or some technical guy. Right. I had no idea. Yeah. And then in walks Steve Jobs to the thing. He sits right down. He says, all right, show me what you got. I gave him a demonstration. He asked me like a bunch of questions. He's probably in there for 15, 20 minutes. He's like, great, thank you. He just wanted to see where the technology was at the time.
Crazy. So no berating questions or like.
No, he was great. He was fine. I've heard so many stories, and I have friends and family who worked for Apple and worked for him, and you know they told me some pretty interesting stories about the guy. Yeah, but he was gracious. He was very nice. There was no way that I felt any of these, sort of negative things that I had heard about him at all.
Well, that's pretty awesome. I mean, that means he liked the product. So what happened after the meeting? How did that
was it? It wasn't ready. He wanted continuous speech. It was called discrete speech. You had to stop between each word because the software, the chip, like the Intel chip, wasn't fast enough yet,
right,
to handle what needed to do with speech. That I think we needed to get to like the Pentium or maybe the 486 before it that had enough processing power to handle speech, because speech recognition takes a lot of horsepower to make it happen. This thing that we've got here is, I think I read it today, it's 1 billion times more powerful than what they sent up to the moon the first time we went to the moon. Yeah,
I mean, and when you were, if you went through it like I did and you did, it's like I remember at one point, I went from Apple to 286, 386, 486, Pentium 75, Pentium 100 and something, and then it just kept going from there. But at one point, I remember Best Buy used to send out the weekend flyer in the mail, and you will buy a computer that Saturday, and then the next weekend, there'll be one with double the processing power for the same price. Because that's how it was in the 90s. It was just like it was just so fast. It was just, it was just advancing so fast, and it was crazy. But
Moore's Law.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the books that you have done. So let's walk through the books. Where can people get them? What are the names? What are they're all about?
Oh, I just have one. I've only written one book. It's about a year old. I never intended to write a book. So I'm not a writer. I don't like to write. I actually, for those of you who would like to write a book and don't like to write like me, which I think is more the majority than anything else. And you hear the horror stories, like 3 or 4 years, and I had to slog through all this thing. And then the editing process was like pulling teeth. And so I didn't have any of that. I hired a company and I spoke my book. I wrote probably 20 to 30% of the actual words that are in the book.
Yeah.
Because I do write. I write blog posts and things. And I'm just not a great writer. My writing is decent because I write over and over again. So I write something, then I put it away, and then I look at it again. And I know the techniques that you need to apply to make it at least better writing. But I can recognize really good writing, and mine isn't it. So I hired someone to do it, and the woman who wrote my book was phenomenal. She is such. I read it. I've read my book 7 times because I did the editing. So. I really enjoyed the way she wrote, and she helped put it together. And then they helped me with the cover. You can see the book behind me, the blue ones. There's one on the wall. And faster, on the shelf. And so they helped me with everything. They helped me with the writing. They helped me with the formatting of it and the layout. Obviously, table of contents, all the kind of thing. The cover itself. Then I did an Audible version, and they helped me get a narrator who's actually an award-winning narrator, which was pretty cool. It was a man who read. I got introduced to his voice through my daughter because he read some children's books, young adult books, and we loved them. And when they asked me, what kind of narrator do you want, man, woman, accent, whatever, I said, I don't really care. I said, but let me send you a clip of someone, if they can sort of sound like this guy, that would be great.
That's awesome.
And they went out and found him. So that's awesome. I actually met him. His name is LJ Ganser. He's an actor. He does Mountain Dew commercials, and he's done plays. And he's not a big actor, but he does a lot of bit stuff. You've probably seen him if you watch sports when you do the Mountain Dew commercial. He's like the cowboy.
I probably know who he is because I have this weird thing, and my wife calls me out on it all the time. For some reason, I don't know what it is, but I can recognize voices. Cool. When I'm watching like TV or commercials or whatever, I go, "Oh, that's George Clooney." She's like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's George Clooney." Like that's George Clooney. And sure enough, you look it up, it's George Clooney. Like, it's so crazy. For some reason, I have this thing where I can like just recognize somebody's voice. And but that's so cool that you bring the book thing up, because everybody's like, you got to do a book. You got to do a book. You got to do a book. I'm like, oh, I don't do it. I don't want to do it. Like, I hate writing. I can do it like you. I know everything about copywriting. I can write copy when I sit down and do it, but it's so time consuming for me. It's not natural at all.
Yeah, I agree.
That will take me forever to get one done. And one of the best advice Jim, oh oh my God, I just forgot Jim's last name. He's going to kill me. Anyway, Jim, just look Jim copywriting. That's how he'll come up everywhere. The best advice that he gave me was that the best way to write a book is to get a friend or somebody to just sit you down and ask you questions about what you do. And you just answer those questions, record them on tape, and then give them to someone who's a ghostwriter, and that'll be the base for the book, and let him get started on it. And then they'll help you out onto it by asking you more questions. So now you're not just sitting down in front of a blank screen. Okay, how do I start writing my book? Well, here, you know what I mean? And it's like, that makes sense to me. So I'm assuming the process is kind of the same. That's what a ghostwriter does, right? They just ask you questions and then elaborate on whatever the answers are to turn it into a book, or you give them a direction. How does that work?
So I think there are lots of different ways that people write books. I think one of the better ways is how you started, which is you should really understand the vision for the book. Imagine it's done. What impact will it have had? What will the reader come away with? All those kinds of things. So that's what actually the company I worked with is Scribe Media. And they brought me through a process. We didn't start writing until like the third call. And each call was 2 hours long. We laid out lots of stuff first. And then we basically put this framework together. And then we filled in the pieces in the middle. Once we figured that out, it was a lot easier to do that than to start from nothing. I think if you write fiction, that might be easier. It kind of got a story and it can go in all sorts of different ways. But if you're writing a business book or something that has, it's really, it's contained. Or it should be, you might find that you like to do it the other way. But for me, it was a lot easier to do that. Take the time to really understand. I think I answered 10 or 15 questions about who's the audience and who's the secondary audience and what do you want them to say when they're done reading? All these sort of questions before we wrote a word. Now, I had already been thinking about what I would put in a book anyway, and so that helped. I already had the team, the system, and the cash thing at a high level, but then we broke it down. I think there are 20 some odd chapters in my book. It's 250, 270 pages, something like that. And
it's obviously about, how to grow a business further, faster.
Get there faster. So it's further, faster, the vital few steps to take the guesswork out of growth. And the law of the vital few is the Pareto principle. Most people know it as the 80-20 rule. So what I did is I said, because there are so many business books out there, I wasn't just going to write another one.
Yeah.
I would just recommend one. This is a good one. So I applied the Pareto principle, which was, there's lots of stuff you can do. But what I found, if you do these few things first, these are the big, huge knobs that if you turn them, they'll get you further, faster.
Yeah.
This is what I recommend you do. There's lots of other stuff to do. The stuff I teach to my clients is not in many of the things are not in my book. I just did the first few and focused on those things because that's what you need. Just need a little momentum. You need a little habit and discipline to get going. And that gives you motivation. It also, gives you energy as well, and the team energy as well. So that's my book, and it's a do-it-yourself book. So it's not just read it and say, "Great, that was a good read." I also have 25, I think, exercises on my website, and so you'll stop at a point in a chapter or at the end of a chapter and say, "Oh, go to the website, download the thing." And I tried to write them so you could do it all yourself. You didn't need a coach. And if you did those, then that should get you a long way there. And then if you want to do more, you want to go deeper, I'd say the book is, if you put it in the context of like college, my book is 101 and 201 of the course. Still 301, 401, maybe 501, master's and PhD.
Sure.
Still lots of other stuff to do if you want to go there.
Yeah.
So that's the point of the book.
So basically, if you're starting out, it'll further advance of where you're at and get you to a level that if they want, they can talk to you. You can come in and definitely help them out to go even further.
The premise of my book is if you as a leader do these things, then you will do what you're supposed to do, which is fire yourself from the day to day as much as possible, because your job isn't to run the company anymore. Your job is to lead the company into the future, predict the future of the business. And if you're running the company day to day all the time, you can't predict the future. You don't have time because the future is a creation process, right? You're thinking of the new things, innovation and insight. And insight comes to us when our mind is quiet. And so I ask this of lots of podcast hosts. So like Christian, when do you get your best ideas? What are you doing when like an idea will flash in your head? Can you recall?
All the time. It's going to sound super corny, but in the shower.
Yeah.
For some reason, it's the shower. I don't know what it is.
Popular place. On a run, just hanging out, being on board, because that's when your brain is quiet. And that's when it's actually a physical process in your brain. there are connections that aren't together that all of a sudden fuse together, and that's when you get the insight.
I get annoyed because I'm like, really, right now, this is where I get the idea. I can't write it down, so I keep repeating it to myself. I'm like, it's happening to me at the gym too. It's always the shower and the gym, those two.
Yeah,
I wish, definitely those two for sure. But
yeah, I recommend having your phone like on the sink so you can just lean out, do a quick thing, and then go back to the shower.
I do have the phone in the sink. So as soon as I get out I'm like, I got to write it down because then my ADD kicks in and then forget it. Like I'll forget about it. So
they do have like little pads that you can have in the shower that are waterproof, and so you can have.
Don't tell me that because I will get that and put it in the bathroom.
You should. Why not? If that's where your best ideas go, why not?
My wife's gonna be like, "What are you doing?"
Well, you can leave her nice little notes in the shower, and she'll love you.
That's true. So yeah, I like that idea. So Bill, man, this has been so much fun. So where can people get the book? Where can they go to get the book? Obviously, your website, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so my website is the best place for anything. I try to have everything there. It's in one place. It's a very small website. I think it's 8 pages long. And my book is on there. You can download my book for free if you want, just to read the PDF. You can also go to Amazon or Audible to get the paperback, the Kindle, or the audiobook. And I get $4 or $5 if you do that. That's great. But if you don't want to pay for it, I'm more about the message than the money. I'd rather have people have the book and maybe make their lives a little better than, I'm not going to make any money off the book. So I'm not really.
Yeah, that's awesome.
All my writing is there. I've had 130 blog posts I've written over the last 5 years.
Wow.
They're all short. Well, the first ones weren't short, but the last 4 years, if it takes you more than 2 minutes to read a blog post of mine, it's too long. There's almost always something to do in it, like an action to take, and it's very prescriptive. So I try to be helpful. It's not more. I try not to pontificate. Look how brilliant I am. I want you to be able to do something simple, practical, and actionable is sort of the mantra I like to have with the stuff that I do. So yeah, if you go, and that's www.catalystgrowthadvisors.com, and you can contact me. My calendar link is there. You can book some time with me, whatever you want.
Awesome. So guys, if you want to get the book, go to Bill's site. If you're a CEO entrepreneur who's like getting ready to scale or scaling at, getting to that point of take it to the next level, definitely contact Bill right here. Go to the website. And Bill, thank you so much for coming on. I really, truly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it as well. It's always nice.
Absolutely. Thank you.